questions? Okay, so incarceration, imprisonment, jail, or whilst awaiting trial. Therefore, it's a facility where convicts are detained from society, not making any more victims out there, and they're stripped of various freedoms. Prisons are used substantially around the world, for there's not a single country, bar that of Antarctica, and Antarctica has no permanent residence anyway, there's not a single country that does not have imprisonment as its go-to punishment. And therefore, with a fascination in crime trends, the police force, and law, I wanted to look at why is it we favour prisons over other forms of punishment? Do they really work? And where to start? Well, you should always start at the beginning. So, the history of prison. The first prisons were built under the rule of Henry II in 1166. These prisons, highly unsanitary, very poor conditions. Many prisoners died every year because of disease and illness. All the prisoners had to sleep on bare earth, they weren't given any beds, and usually would only be watered or fed every other day, if they're lucky, because sometimes it was only 3 times a week. And now, as rulers began to declare what you can be punished for and why you can be sent to jail, the prison population soared century upon century. So much so that by the 1700s, it got to a point where it was about to concave. And they had to quickly think, what can we do to solve this? So they saw the introduction of transportation. Transportation is where convicts are stripped to British colonies, such as Australia and America. However, this didn't last very long at all, because many people quickly realised that you can't burden the Aboriginals of these lands with hordes of criminals. But there was still a big prison population, and so they still had to find a way around it. So the 1800s saw a change in ideas among the emerging liberal class, and they began to realise, like, what if we try and help those that keep coming back to prison, stop them from coming back to prison? And so, in 1877, prisons became centralised under the Prison Commission. This was based on John Howard's reforms, but John Howard's reforms were based on Elizabeth Fry's ideologies of prison is not for revenge, but to lessen crime and reform the criminal. Unfortunately, as we've seen throughout history, a woman's voice somehow is not as loud as a man's. So it was named after John Howard. 20 years later, this became solidified as the Prison Act of Reformation highlighted that prison labour should be productive, not least for the prisoners who should be able to earn their livelihood upon release. So even back at the end of the 19th century, we was thinking about reforming criminals and stopping them from coming back. And still, this is very much the underlying prison chassis of today, where we try and help criminals who keep coming back, and they are able to and encouraged to enrol in developmental, educational schemes that should enhance their skills or abilities or knowledge of a certain trade, where they should not be coming back to prison afterwards. So, therefore, I wanted to look at what are the statistics like for these educational schemes. Well, here they are. There are only some 9,700 prisoners currently enrolled in educational schemes in prisons in the UK today. However, the government said in their 2010 to 2015 policy paper on reoffending and rehabilitation, this would be pushed to 45,000 out of 80,000. The government has not reached their 2015 target. So, it's fair to say that it's only reaching a small minority of those in prison. But there's going to be people that argue, yes, but it just hasn't taken off yet. They just need more time, they need some more help. The things that they're doing for these 9,700 prisoners is extremely beneficial. That isn't so. In a survey by the Prison Reform Trust, only 12% of employers in 2010 had employed somebody with a criminal record, no matter if they had the correct qualifications. Only 12% had employed someone with a criminal record in the last 3 years. And then 1 in 5 said they would exclude or do exclude anybody with a criminal record from the application process. So really these rehabilitation schemes haven't taken off, and they're not of much value at the moment in the prison system. But prisons aren't purely based on reform, because as we saw in 1166, they were there to take the people away from society, stop them from causing harm to anybody else. So if we look at the other advantages that they're supposed to be having on criminals, the punishment of prison lays with the stripping of various freedoms. Massively, the fact that they have limited visitation, or for some, the complete inability to see anybody beyond the facility walls. And now for some prisoners, this is extremely hard. They don't like the fact they can't see the people they dearest love. And come the end of their sentence, they are a changed man or woman. They've showed repent and led away from the life of crime. But I hope you picked up my use of the word some there, because if we understand that the majority of the prison population in the UK comes from the lower to some middle class population, they're brought up in cultures and communities of crime where the people they associate themselves more with are on the inside. And now, talking about the inside, the luxuries of prison. Compared to the subjects that in 1166 had to sleep on bare earth and watered and fed every other day, they get a ton of amenities nowadays. They get 3 meals a day, a bed, television, radio. They get familiar faces they know, a society that works, a daily regime of work and then free time, and the free time can have recreational activities such as pool, darts, football, gym, gaming. There's a whole host depending on what prison you're at. And now it's easy to then see why we have people like Craig Pitts here who become stuck in the revolving door syndrome. The revolving door syndrome is where somebody is unable to go back to normal life after their sentencing because of a lack in skill and because of the amount of societal changes that have occurred whilst they've been in prison. They become a career criminal where upon release they can't fit back into normal society, they commit another crime and are back into prison, usually within a year. Because the UK statistics show that 46% of 80,000 prisoners end up back in prison. As I said, usually within a year. And this is heightened at 58% for those serving sentences under 12 months. There's a society within prison that has limited stress and responsibilities when compared to that of the outside, because if they can't find a job and thus aren't being paid, how can they afford a roof over their head where prison offers it for free? So, what's all this costing? Well, the cost of prisons to the taxpayer in the UK stands at a whopping £12.8 billion per year. It costs £120,000 to first send an inmate into prison and then £40,000 to keep them in for every year after that. It's clearly not being used for its cost benefit. But then what's the answer? How can the prison systems in the UK be improved? So I want to introduce the city we call home. Singapore has been ranked in the Economist Intelligence Unit of the Straits Times as the second safest city in the world and the safest in Asia. This is because in 2014, so last year, there was only 32,196 crimes. Now this equates to 1 in 155 people committing crimes, which at first glance I actually thought was quite a lot, because if you think about that in terms of our year, that kind of destines one of us to be a criminal. But if we then look back at the UK statistics show that last year they had 5,131,407 recorded crimes, which not only totals the population of Singapore, but works out that nearly 4 of us in here would be a criminal. 1 in 10. So, how has Singapore got it so right? How are they recording these impeccably low crime rates? In a review by Kishore Mahbubani, I hope I got that right, he states that the low crime rate is due to Singapore's hardline approach on punishing lawbreakers and the strict penalties they can face. You see, here in Singapore there is a range of punishments that increase in severity depending on the type of person you are, the type of crime committed, and the amount of offences you have had. Whereas the UK doesn't have quite as many. And to put it into a model that might be more easily understood, let's take school for example. We are all here today, notably, and let's say 90% of us turned up to registration on time. It's probably more, but just for our whole numbers, 90%. Why was that so? Why didn't we just come in when we wanted to? Well, we know we could be punished. We know that if we do not turn up on time, we are going to be perhaps spoken to by tutors, by teachers, given detentions. So 90% of us turn up on time for registration. That still leaves 10% that didn't. They're not too worried about the punishment. And so 10% have to be spoken to by their form tutor about being late. Now this punishment might be enough to put some people off. Some people might say, okay, I'm sorry, I will be on time for the rest of the year, and so they do. But there still might be 5% that do not. They continue coming late for 1 week, 2 weeks. And so not only are they being told off every time now, they might now be being kept behind after school on Thursdays, Fridays, whenever, depending on how much they're doing. And then again, people might say, okay, I don't want to be kept behind anymore, I will come in on time now. So the numbers drop again, maybe there's only 2.5% left that are still consistently coming late. And then for the 2.5% that are coming late, they're now being warned by the head teacher that they are in chance of being expelled or suspended. But what I'm trying to show you is that as the increase in severity of punishment goes up, the amount of people that are breaking the rules goes down. And that's what happened is in Singapore, because you can have fines, imprisonment, corporal punishment, deportation and capital punishment. They're 5 major ways of punishing a lawbreaker. But the UK, they have fines that aren't as hefty as Singapore, they have community service and they have imprisonment. Beyond imprisonment is more imprisonment. You can only be awarded, or not awarded, sanctioned, a longer sentence in jail. And for these people that are calling prison their home because they know how it works and how to fit in there, they're not worried about how long they're spending in jail. It really doesn't matter to them. And not only is the amount of punishment increased in Singapore, the severity in each punishment is increased. For example, the prison system here have been argued by some people as inhumane. If you look on the World Prison Forum or One Nation News, it is a hotly debated subject. Because criminals here can be isolated up to 23 hours a day in their cell alone. They don't have beds, they're given floor mats, but they don't have beds, and they actually say they prefer to sleep on the floor. It's so hot in their cells, it's much cooler to sleep on the tiled floors. They have to adhere to a strict army regiment where they salute and call every officer a sir and answer to their click of their fingers. And they don't have any TVs or radios or recreational activities. They may well have books or newspapers, but they're outdated by some years. And so what Singapore base all of their punishments, but specifically the prison system on, is fear as a deterrence. Lord Chief Justice Cockburn, he told the prison committee that the treatment of prisoners should be deterrence through suffering, inflicted punishment for crime, and the fear of the repetition of it. And then again, Ernest van der Hey, he's a professor at Fordham University, and he studied the question of fear as a deterrence closely for many years. He says, whatever people fear most is likely to deter most. And we link that back again to school. Whatever we fear most, if we fear being excluded, it's likely to deter most. We're not going to commit the sanction. And Singapore has proved that both of these quotes are right. If you're scared of the punishment that you may face, you are less likely to commit the action. Therefore, how can the UK take this on board and move forward? Well, what I suggest is, if the UK revise their rehabilitation schemes, possibly look into them deeper. Why don't they have much value? How can they increase the value they are having on people so that employers are looking at them better? And then they take back the luxuries of prison, so taking away these amenities and taking away the ease of people calling it home where they're not able to fit in as well, and perhaps enforce a strict regime like Singapore, then not only are we sticking with the aim of prisons in the fact that it takes the harmless people away from society, thus keeping those who are paying for it safe, it should, by what Singapore suggests, reduce the crime rates and cut the costs. If you remember, 12.8 billion a year a taxpayer spends on prisons in the UK. In Singapore, 30,000 Singapore dollars. That works out about £15,000 a year. We all know governments like to save a little bit of money. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thomas?
Compared to the UK, are the reoffending rates in Singapore much different?
Are the reoffending rates much different? Yes. Yes, they are. And I didn't include them in the slideshow, actually, because not only was there so much I could fit in, but I didn't want to feel like I was repeating myself, banging on how good Singapore seems to be. But just to let you know, the Singapore, its highest it's ever been, is in 2011, and that was at 27.4%. Whereas compared to the UK, it's at 46% right now. And the Singapore is hard to find statistics, actually. The government doesn't like to publish them yearly, and even if they are coming from the government, you don't quite know the amount of truth that lay within. It's only in their every 4-year ones that you know that they are set in stone. So I couldn't find last year's reoffending rates, but the ones before that were all lower than the UK, especially 2011. Yes, Anna?
Would you not agree that economic benefits to those in the lower cost systems that are likely to reoffend would also be a way of making sure they have jobs and lowering the unemployment would also be a way of lowering the output of prison?
So if we help the people in the lower classes first before they go into prison, yeah, for sure, that would help. And I think it's just the government's got to look at how can they help, how can they force these people to try and learn these skills, because although you have to go to school in the UK, some people drop out, some people aren't as engaged, and because not all schools are at the same level, the schools in these areas aren't as good as others, and so you still might walk away with less of an education and knowledge on certain areas, even though you are being forced. So I think, yes, in answer to your question, this should definitely come before and look at how to help these lower classes, but it's just how does the government do that, and that's another question to answer in the matrix. Ben?
You talked a lot about Singapore's varying degrees and methods of punishment, notably capital punishment. Do you think capital punishment should be implemented in the UK?
Well, capital punishment, that's a highly emotive area, and many people feel very strongly about that. And it does deserve much more of a in-depth analysis of the advantages and disadvantages, because although I'd like to say what I want to say, I know people will disagree, and I don't have all the statistics, but I know that people will disagree because there have been cases in the past and are likely to be cases in the future if it is employed that people were wrongly convicted of the death sentence. And it's much easier to bring somebody out of jail if they're wrongly convicted than it is to bring them back to life. So, but if the statistics show, like they do in Singapore, that it's based on the fear as deterrence, and that whatever people fear most is likely to deter most. I don't know if you saw, but in the Ernest van der Haag quote, he says, what's going to deter a prisoner more than the death sentence if they're thinking about killing a guard or another inmate when they're already in prison? And so, personally, I would be in favour of the capital punishment because the statistics show that it would reduce crime rates. But it is an emotive subject that needs much more in-depth analysis of the advantages and disadvantages. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much, guys, for coming along.
Yeah, well done, Sam. Lots